It started like any other summer morning. No alarms. No warnings. No signs of danger. The desert air was already warm, heavy with stillness. Silence stretched across the long road leading into the park, broken only by the sound of tires rolling over sand. On June 28, 2014, Erin Corwin was last seen near Joshua Tree. At the time, no one realized a quiet choice had already set something irreversible in motion. One message. One planned meeting. One ordinary morning she never returned from. Wind moved gently across the desert floor. A car engine faded into the distance. And somewhere behind her, a home sat unlocked, waiting. Erin Corwin was born on July 15, 1994. From the start, her life was shaped by choice and care. She was adopted into a Tennessee family built on compassion. For her parents, adoption wasn't convenience. It was a calling. Erin grew up surrounded by siblings. Noise. Responsibility. Shared life. A home where everyone mattered. She was gentle by nature. Patient in a way people noticed. She had a calming presence, especially with animals. From a young age, Erin connected with them instinctively. Animals that resisted others trusted her. Even difficult horses responded to her quietly. One small detail became family legend. Erin trained a rabbit to walk beside her on a leash. Not through force, through trust. She also owned a pony named Riley, kept at a nearby stable. That's where Erin felt most at peace. When life felt heavy, she went there. To care. To breathe. Her childhood included loss. The family experienced heartbreak early on. But Erin was taught something important. Love doesn't prevent grief. It helps you carry it. Her parents focused on meaning, not anger, not blame. Erin learned that lesson deeply. As she grew older, her nurturing spirit stayed. She worked locally, helped her family, cared for animals. She loved simple routines, quiet plans, a future that felt stable. To those who knew her, Erin was dependable, thoughtful, the kind of person who made others feel safe. At this point, her life felt grounded, normal, protected by love and routine. Nothing yet hinted at how fragile that safety truly was. Erin first met Jonathan Corwin while she was still in school. At the time, it was nothing remarkable. Just two young people crossing paths. Years passed. Life moved on. Then, unexpectedly, they reconnected online. Messages turned into conversations. Conversations turned into something deeper. They wrote poems to each other. Talked about the future. About what kind of life they wanted to build. It felt hopeful. Intentional. Jonathan decided to enlist in the Marines. To him, it meant purpose. Stability. A clear direction forward. Erin supported him fully. She believed in the plan. Believed in them. In November 2012, they married in Las Vegas. Simple. Certain. Not long after, Jonathan received new orders. California. The move felt like an adventure. A fresh start far from home. A chance to begin something entirely their own. They settled near the base in San Bernardino County. Close to the desert. Close to wide open roads and quiet nights. To the outside world, everything looked steady. A newly married couple. A military posting. A shared future unfolding exactly as expected. They made new friends. Found routines. Filled their days with work and ordinary moments. There were no public arguments. No emergency calls. No signs that anything was wrong. If something felt off, it stayed private. Easy to overlook. Easy to dismiss as normal stress. From the outside, their life appeared settled. A young couple building something new. Doing what countless others had done before them. Nothing appeared broken yet. Nothing suggested danger. This was the illusion. The calm before questions began to surface. Distance didn't arrive suddenly. It crept in quietly. Jonathan's training schedule grew heavier. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into long absences. When he left, Erin stayed behind. Alone in a new place. Far from family. Far from what felt familiar. Then came a loss she wasn't prepared for. A pregnancy that ended too soon. Grief settled in slowly. Not loud. Not dramatic. It showed up in silence. In sleepless nights. In the way hope suddenly felt fragile. Jonathan tried to be supportive. But distance made comfort incomplete. Phone calls couldn't replace presence. And Erin needed presence. She needed someone nearby. Someone who noticed. That's when subtle shifts began. A neighbor started paying closer attention. Not in a way that seemed alarming. At least not at first. He listened. He checked in. He noticed when Erin seemed withdrawn. At a time when she felt unseen. Someone was watching carefully. Comfort can be powerful when someone is hurting. And comfort can change shape quickly. What started as conversation became familiarity. Familiarity became routine. Boundaries didn't vanish overnight. They softened. Moments lingered longer than they should. Conversations grew more personal. Erin was vulnerable. And vulnerability can feel like connection. To the outside world, nothing had changed. She still smiled. Still followed her routines. But inside she was unraveling quietly. She was grieving. She was lonely. She was searching for reassurance that her life still mattered. And someone nearby recognized that need. At the same time, Jonathan remained focused on repairing what felt strained. He believed time would heal the distance. That things would settle once training slowed. He didn't know how much Erin was struggling. Or how much she was leaning on someone else. This is how danger often enters. Not with chaos. Not with warnings. But with patience. With attention that feels helpful. With listening that feels safe. Comfort turns into closeness. Closeness turns into secrecy. And secrecy changes everything. Friends might later describe small changes. Shorter messages. Different moods. Moments of distraction. But at the time, none of it felt urgent. None of it seemed threatening. Life was busy. Stress was normal. That's what made it easy to miss. Erin didn't believe she was stepping into danger. She believed she was surviving grief. She believed she was finding understanding. But sometimes the most dangerous moments don't feel dangerous at all. Sometimes they feel like relief. Sometimes they feel like being heard. And sometimes, by the time anyone realizes something is wrong, the lines have already blurred beyond recognition. This wasn't a single decision. It was a series of quiet moments. Moments that felt harmless. Moments that slowly altered direction. And as those moments accumulated, the foundation that once felt stable began to weaken. Still, no alarm sounded. No one stepped in. Because nothing looked wrong yet. Sometimes danger doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it listens first. June 28th began like any other morning. Early light filtered through the windows. The desert air was already warming. Erin moved quietly through the apartment. Careful not to rush. Careful not to wake the day too quickly. She told Jonathan she was heading into the park. Just to explore. To look at trails she might later share with her mother during an upcoming visit. It sounded ordinary. Harmless. Jonathan didn't hesitate. There was no reason to. She leaned in. Kissed him goodbye. And told him she loved him. In that moment he believed things were improving. That the distance between them was closing. That whatever strain they'd been carrying was finally easing. Erin walked out the door carrying quiet hope with her. She believed she was meeting someone who cared. Someone who had made promises. Someone who had spoken of a shared future. In her mind this meeting mattered. It wasn't casual. It wasn't meaningless. She believed it could change everything. As she drove toward the park, possibilities filled the silence. Questions. Anticipation. A future taking shape in her thoughts. She had endured loss. Loneliness. Uncertainty. And now, she believed clarity was finally coming. But that clarity never arrived. Hours passed. Jonathan checked his phone. Nothing. He called once. Then again. No answer. By afternoon, concern replaced patience. By evening, concern turned to fear. He called repeatedly. Left messages that went unanswered. The silence felt wrong. Unfamiliar. Erin always checked in. Always responded. Night fell and still, there was nothing. That morning goodbye replayed in Jonathan's mind. The kiss. The calm tone of her voice. That was the last time he saw his wife. By the next day, The absence could no longer be explained away. The silence had become undeniable. What Erin believed would be a turning point had become something else entirely. A single decision. A single meeting. And a morning that quietly marked the point of no return. When Erin didn't come home that night, Jonathan tried to stay calm. At first, he told himself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe she'd lost track of time. He called her once. Then again. Each call went unanswered. As the hours passed, concern began to harden into something heavier. Something he couldn't shake. By the next morning, there was no avoiding it. This wasn't normal. Erin always checked in. Always answered. Jonathan contacted authorities and reported her missing. That single phone call changed everything. Within hours, search efforts began. Law enforcement gathered details. What Erin had been wearing. Where she said she was going. When she was last seen. They treated it carefully at first. Many missing person cases resolve quickly. A misturn. A broken phone. A misunderstanding. But as time passed, nothing resolved itself. Search teams moved into the desert. Volunteers joined in. Helicopters scanned the landscape. The terrain was vast. Unforgiving. Endless. Days passed with no sign of Erin. Then came the first discovery. Several miles north of the park, Erin's car was found. Parked in an isolated area. Far from trails. Far from where she said she was going. The location immediately raised concern. This wasn't a place someone would stop casually. Not to hike. Not to explore. Investigators secured the area and documented everything. The car appeared undamaged. Nothing obvious suggested an accident. But the absence of explanation was troubling. From that moment on, the case changed. Investigators shifted from searching for someone who might be lost to searching for answers about what might have happened. They began retracing Erin's final days. Her phone records became critical. Who had she spoken to? Who had she messaged? What time did communication stop? Digital footprints don't lie, but they don't tell the full story either. They reviewed text messages, call logs, social media activity. Investigators noticed patterns. Certain numbers appeared more often than expected. They built a timeline. Minute by minute. Hour by hour. Witnesses were interviewed. Friends. Neighbors. Anyone who might have seen Erin before she vanished. Most accounts painted the same picture. A quiet morning. Nothing unusual. But one detail kept resurfacing. Erin had planned to meet someone. That raised a question investigators couldn't ignore. Who knew where she was going? Because whoever that person was, they might be the last one to see her. As investigators dug deeper, more questions emerged. Why was her car left where it was found? Why not closer to the park entrance? And why hadn't Erin contacted anyone afterward? The timing didn't make sense. The more they looked, the less accidental it felt. Then came the discovery that shifted everything again. Investigators uncovered information Erin had kept private. A relationship. Hidden from her husband. Hidden from most of the people in her life. It explained secrecy. It explained divided attention. But it also introduced a new layer of risk. Trust fractured instantly. Jonathan learned about the relationship through investigators. The revelation was devastating. But for law enforcement, it clarified something important. This wasn't random. Someone had known Erin's plans. Someone had reason to meet her privately. Focus shifted away from theories of misdirection or chance. Attention narrowed to people within her inner circle. Those who had access. Those who had opportunity. And those who had something to lose. Investigators examined interactions closely. Not just what was said, but what wasn't. Gaps in timelines became significant. Inconsistencies stood out. One person's account drew particular attention. Statements that didn't align with evidence. Details that changed slightly over time. Nothing definitive yet, but enough to raise quiet alarms. Investigators remained cautious. Without proof, suspicion alone meant nothing. They continued gathering data, comparing timelines, cross-referencing movements. Each answer led to more questions. Why had Erin trusted this person so completely? What promises had been made? And what had gone wrong that morning? As days turned into weeks, the search intensified. Hope hadn't disappeared, but realism had taken hold. Investigators understood that time mattered. The longer answers were delayed, the harder the truth would be to uncover. Still, they pressed forward, because every missing person deserves clarity, and every unanswered question demands pursuit. This was no longer just a search for Erin. It was an investigation into trust, secrecy, and a chain of decisions that led her into silence. And somewhere within the data, within the timelines and messages, the truth was waiting to be uncovered. As the investigation deepened, attention began to narrow. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. Among everyone interviewed, one individual stood out. Not because of panic, not because of visible anger, but because of proximity. This person had access. They knew Erin's routines. They knew her state of mind. And most importantly, they knew where she was going that morning. Investigators don't rush conclusions. They look for patterns, for alignment. And here, alignment was missing. On the surface, this individual appeared cooperative, polite, willing to talk. They answered questions without hesitation, offered explanations freely, presented themselves as helpful. But cooperation alone doesn't mean truth. Investigators listened carefully, not just to what was said, but how it was said. Details shifted, timelines softened, certain facts were emphasized, others avoided. Stories that should have matched didn't quite line up. Small inconsistencies on their own mean very little. But when they repeat, they begin to matter. This person acknowledged knowing Erin well, acknowledged spending time with her, but minimized its importance. They framed their connection as harmless, casual, insignificant. Yet phone records suggested otherwise. Frequent contact, private exchanges, communication that continued even as Erin's marriage struggled. Investigators compared statements with data. What was claimed? What was recorded? The two didn't fully agree. That raised quiet alarms. Not enough to accuse. Not enough to detain. But enough to watch closely. Psychological profiling became critical. This was someone facing consequences. Personal, professional. Their life was approaching a turning point. Major changes. Decisions that couldn't be undone. And Erin's presence complicated everything. Investigators asked themselves a difficult question. What happens when someone feels cornered? When secrets feel moments away from exposure? Some people withdraw. Some confess. Others attempt control. Control of narrative. Control of timing. Control of outcome. As questioning continued, fear surfaced subtly. Not panic, but defensiveness. Certain questions produced tension. Certain topics were redirected. And when investigators pressed gently, responses became vague. The individual insisted they had nothing to hide. That Erin's disappearance shocked them as much as anyone. But shock usually comes with confusion. With questions. This person already had answers. Answers that arrived too quickly. Investigators revisited the morning Erin vanished. Who saw her last? Who knew her plans? Who could confirm their own whereabouts? The answers grew narrower. There were claims of being elsewhere. Claims of routine activities. But verification proved difficult. Witnesses couldn't confirm timelines. Records left gaps. And those gaps mattered. The more investigators looked, the clearer it became that this was not random. Erin hadn't simply wandered off. She had gone to meet someone she trusted. Someone she believed cared about her future. Someone who understood exactly how vulnerable she was. That trust was central to the case. Because trust grants access. Access to emotions. To plans. To moments when defenses are down. Investigators considered motive carefully. There was fear of exposure. Fear of consequences at home. Fear of losing control over carefully managed appearances. Those fears don't automatically lead to wrongdoing, but they create pressure. And pressure changes behavior. As evidence accumulated, investigators felt they were circling something important. Not proof, but intention. Was Erin's disappearance an accident? A sudden turn of events no one could predict? Or had decisions been made long before that morning? Plans formed quietly. Steps taken gradually. Investigators reviewed past behavior. Online searches. Statements made to others. Certain remarks, once harmless, took on new meaning. Comments about isolation. About places no one would notice. At the time, they meant nothing. Now they carried weight. Still, investigators remained careful. Without direct confirmation, suspicion alone could not move the case forward. They needed something concrete. Something that connected fear, access, and opportunity into a single narrative. And until that surfaced, the individual remained free. Outwardly calm. Outwardly cooperative. But closely watched. Because the central questions still lingered, unanswered and unavoidable. Was Erin's disappearance the result of chance? Or was it the outcome of a plan shaped by fear, secrecy, and the desire to control what came next? As weeks passed with no answers, search teams widened their efforts. What began as focused sweeps expanded into something far more deliberate. The desert had been searched before. But investigators' new experience had taught them something important. Sometimes the truth isn't where you look first. It's where no one expects to look at all. Detectives revisited every interview. Every offhand remark. Every detail that had once seemed unimportant. And one detail resurfaced. A comment made casually. Almost forgettable. A reference to a location few people knew existed. A place not marked clearly. A place rarely visited. The kind of place someone would only find if they already knew where to look. With that in mind, investigators redirected their search. They brought in specialists familiar with the terrain. People who understood what lay beneath the surface of the desert. This time, the goal was no longer just hope. It was confirmation. And in a location most would never notice, investigators found what they feared and what they needed. Clear proof that Erin had not left that place on her own. The discovery changed everything. What had once been unanswered questions now formed a complete picture. Timelines aligned. Inconsistencies became explanations. The investigation moved swiftly. Because once the truth becomes visible, delay only prolongs harm. Authorities formally identified the person responsible as Christopher Brandon Lee, a former Marine who had been part of Erin Corwin's inner circle. Lee was located thousands of miles away, far from the desert where Erin vanished. An arrest was made without incident. Evidence recovered in his possession connected directly to the investigation. Digital records reinforced the timeline investigators had built. Statements previously given no longer held under scrutiny. What had once appeared cooperative now unraveled. This was no longer a question of possibility. It was a matter of accountability. The case moved into the courtroom. There were no dramatic scenes. No spectacle. Only a careful presentation of facts. The sequence of events. The communications leading up to that morning. The choices made, and the consequences that followed. The courtroom finally heard the truth. When the defense spoke, explanations were offered. But they could not overcome the evidence laid out methodically before the jury. After deliberation lasting only minutes, a verdict was reached. Unanimous. Christopher Brandon Lee was found responsible for what happened to Erin Corwin. The sentence ensured he would never return to society. For Erin's family, justice did not erase loss. But it ended uncertainty. For more than 2 years, they had lived with questions heavier than grief. Questions with no answers. Now there was finality. Erin was brought home. Returned to the place where she had been loved and raised. Her mother later described the moment not as relief, but as release. The release of waiting. The release of not knowing. The legal outcome closed one chapter. But the impact did not end there. Erin's family chose action over silence. They worked to raise awareness about overlooked dangers. About places left unaddressed for far too long. Jonathan chose privacy. Stepping away from attention. Focused on rebuilding a life permanently changed. The case eventually faded from headlines. As most do. But its lessons remain. About trust. About vulnerability. About how quietly irreversible moments can begin. The truth arrived late. But it arrived completely. And while justice could not restore what was taken, it ensured one thing. Erin Corwin's story would not end unanswered. The most disturbing part wasn't how it ended. It was how long the warnings existed before anyone acted. This story didn't begin with chaos. It began with trust. Trust in familiar faces. Trust in routines. Trust in the belief that ordinary spaces are safe simply because they are familiar. Silence played its role too. Silence born from grief. From confusion. From not wanting to believe something was wrong. Messages went unread. Changes went unnoticed. Moments that felt uncomfortable were explained away. Not out of carelessness, but out of normal human hope. That's what makes stories like this so unsettling. Nothing about it felt urgent at first. Nothing demanded immediate fear. It was quiet, gradual, and by the time concern became certainty, it was already too late. Ordinary spaces became something else entirely. A park meant for exploration. A road meant for travel. Places associated with peace. Quietly turned dangerous. After the legal process ended, Erin's family refused to let her story fade into statistics. They chose action. They spoke out about overlooked risks. About spaces left unmonitored. About dangers hiding in plain sight. Their efforts led to conversations about prevention. About addressing unsafe areas before tragedy forces attention. They understood something important. Justice can close a case. But awareness can change outcomes. Jonathan stepped away from the public eye. Not out of avoidance, but out of survival. Grief doesn't disappear when the cameras turn off. It simply becomes private. Erin's life is remembered not for how it ended, but for who she was. Gentle, nurturing, trusted. And that trust, misplaced by someone else, became the very lesson her story now carries forward. This case reminds us that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it waits. It asks only for silence and familiarity. Justice came, but too late to save a life. What remains is awareness. Awareness of subtle changes. Awareness of vulnerability. Awareness that trust should never mean ignoring instinct. And sometimes, that awareness, shared by one family, heard by one viewer, recognized by one person at the right moment, is what saves the next life. If this case held your attention, subscribe to Iman Crime Files for more documented investigations. New cases are uploaded regularly. Most crimes don't begin with violence. They begin with silence.